Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Millie Montanez. I am the membership manager here at the NFA, and we are so excited to have you join us this afternoon for our virtual event series. If this is your first time attending the NFA event, then I would personally like to welcome you to our flute community. The NFA was founded in 1972 and has since grown to become one of the world's largest flute organizations with members from all 50 states and across the globe. We encourage you to visit our website, nfaonline.org, to learn more about us and how you can get involved. We'd also like to acknowledge that today's event is made possible with support from our members, donors, and the Illinois Arts Council. And we are so excited to have Anne Weaver with us today and presenting on Reinecke's Undine Sonata. So we hope you enjoy. We'll take it. Please take it away, Dan.
So thank you so much. Very excited to be here today. This is a topic that's put a lot of time and effort into for my own personal and love it very much. But we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to kind of get moving a little bit today. All right. The objective for today is that Reinecke did not give programmatic titles or markings to the movements of his Undine Sonata. To understand how Reinecke translated the story into music, we're going to deep dive into the story behind the music and see how Reinecke transferred that story into the musical expressions. By the end of today's session, my goal is that you'll come away not only with a solid understanding of the story that the piece is actually based on, but also have been able to think through one of the interpretations of his musical retelling so that you can start to build your own ideas as well, and your own interpretations of this really grand work. We have a great deal of ground to cover. I'm going to kind of dig in and go through, and then hopefully we'll have time at the end for some back and forth. I would love to hear some of your ideas as well. If you have a score, now's going to be a good time to take it out. But don't worry, I'm also going to put up snippets as we go. So you don't need a score to work your way through this. So let's start with defining some terms. These are common terms, but by defining them, it's going to do two things. It's going to get us on the same page and make sure that we're really understanding what we're looking at. A programmatic piece is a music that tells a story. It sets a scene, it depicts a legend, or in some way uses music to paint a picture. Operas, ballets, those are well-known examples of programmatic music with apparent storylines. But there are some symphonies, some sonatas, and some single pieces of music that also tell a story. Think of, for example, Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, or Debussy's Syrinx for solo flute, or Reinecke's Undine Sonata. A programmatic analysis is looking closely at the music to find how the music depicts the scene or the story. So, for example, think of Peter and the Wolf and the instrumentation that was used for that. You've got the flute for the bird, you've got the duck, you've got the grandpa. You can look at key signatures. Each has its own characteristic. The 6/8 feel that Reinecke uses kind of adds to that water. You can constantly hear the rolling waves. That was time signature. Key signature, there's a key signature. I don't remember which one off the top of my head, but Wagner actually believed that it was an erotic key signature. But each key signature has its own sounds. And then you've got your rhythmic sequences, your motives. You've got so many different ways that you can make your music tell a story. Why do a programmatic analysis? The second movement of this Reinecke sonata is a fantastic example as to why. I remember so clearly the first time I ever heard this piece, and I thought, what on earth is happening in that second movement? And so we're gonna listen to the second movement, just snippets for just a second, to really have a good understanding of why we're doing a programmatic analysis of this piece in particular. Theme 1. There we go. Pause it there and go back to Where did my slideshow go? 1 second, having technical difficulties here. Move this down, back to here. There we go. All right, theme number 2. And then in the same very short piece, I keep having a thing that's covering up my screen. There we go. You have theme number, a very short movement, theme number 3. And all of that is in just one movement. Without knowing the story, these 3 very different themes don't seem to make any sense together. So a programmatic analysis of a programmatic piece helps the performer and the audience to understand the story the music is meant to tell. Historical backdrop for this piece. And actually, Napoleon has a really big piece of it. So before Napoleon's invasion in 1806, Germany was mostly a struggling group of ununified villages. The lack of unification caused Germany to have inconsistent and weak leadership, and famines and hardships were very commonplace. When Napoleon invaded, he began the unification of Germany. With his invasion came a strong desire to overcome France's unwanted leader, and the German nationalism was really born. By 1813, the more unified Germany joined with Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, UK, Portugal, Sweden, and Sardinia to defeat Napoleon in the War of Liberation. It was into this Germany, who was proud of their nation, more unified and liberated, that Reinecke was born. Karl Reinecke was born in Hamburg, Altona, Germany, on June 23rd of 1824. Professionally, Reinecke was a pianist, conductor, and composer from the Romantic era. He followed in the footsteps of Felix Mendelssohn and Robert Schumann and Franz Liszt, and is recognized as one of the most respected and influential musicians in Germany. Peter Tchaikovsky, in his autobiographical account of a tour abroad in the year 1888, states that Karl Reinecke enjoys in Germany, and indeed in all of Europe, the reputation of being an outstanding musician, a talented composer of the Mendelssohn School, and an experienced conductor of the renowned Leipzig concerts. Reinecke is one of the most influential and prominent figures in the German music world, he states. He died in 1910 in Leipzig, Germany. Now, Germany's formational history from 1769, and don't worry, we're going to get into the meat of the music, but knowing this little bit of Germanic history will actually help the interpretation. So we're almost there. But from 1769 to 1910, we're going to watch a very short video in 39 seconds, and we're going to watch Germany's formation. What I want you to take note of is there's going to be an unlabeled gray formation next to France in the start of the video. That's the ununified Germany. And then you're going to see incredible changes leading up to Napoleon's invasion in 1806. The next date to look for is 1813. That's the changes that are going to start happening after the War of Liberation, when Napoleon was defeated. And in the late 1860s, the North German Confederation appears, becoming Germany by 1871, and the gray area is finally unified. Karl Reinecke grew up in this formational period, and he composed Undine in 1882. So here is phenomenal changes in not a long time. The other piece of historical information that's going to be helpful to understanding how to interpret the music is the cultural importance of the Grimm brothers. In 1812, the Grimm brothers published their first 86 of their famous fairy tales, and by 1857, their seventh edition contained 210 tales. The common misconception is that the Grimm brothers wrote these, but actually these tales were not born in the minds of the Grimms, but were rather carefully gathered from the keepers of the tales, the people. The Grimm saw themselves as scribes, which means this was the conversation and this was the culture of the German people to have these stories. And it's important to understand that in the centuries leading up into the 1900s, children were not seen as gentle creatures needing protection, but rather as untrained, inexperienced adults who had to work as soon as they were able to feed themselves. Food was scarce, and many children, if they survived infancy at all, did not survive childhood. These stories, steeped in pagan traditions and cultures, were meant as guiding instructions for children to survive into adulthood and to be passed on to them by their mothers. Therefore, the Grimm brothers wrote them down as teaching tools. Ken Monshine, a PhD who writes an introduction. This is the Grimm fairy tales that has this wonderful introduction by Ken. Says, ironically, the Grimms were the victims of their own success. As the 19th century went on, the middle class grew in power and influence and began to remake society in its own image. Eventually, the liberal ideas of equal rights and equal opportunity for everyone won out. And as the Industrial Revolution progressed, there was more material wealth to go around. People began to have children, invested more in energy in raising them, and provided them with more carefree lives. Childhood is thus an invention of the world of middle class prosperity and home comforts that the Grimms were so wanted to create. And ironically, within that comfortable environment, the brothers' tales were judged to be too harsh for the sort of world they helped to build. So that's the backdrop that caused Germany to be so poised for stories such as, now I'm going to apologize right now, I'm not good at multiple languages, so when I mispronounce names, please forgive me, but Friedrich de la Motte Fouqué's Undine, that's the backdrop for stories like this. In 1811, Baron Friedrich Heinrich Karl de la Motte Fouqué was considered one of the foremost singers of love songs of the time, and he wrote this endearing love story that was full of grace and deep melancholy. And for those of you wondering about his name, his family had French origin, but he was Baron Fouqué. He was very much German. Reinecke was familiar with Fouqué's Undine, and in 1882, he composed his one and only, that I could find, programmatic work, Undine, Sonata for Flute and Piano. This was a story that was read, understood, and remembered for generations, which is likely why Reinecke did not leave us any clues. It was considered a timeless tale that many would agree didn't need notes or descriptors. So the story, as written by Motte Fouqué, and I believe you can see my slideshow. And my slideshow is very, if anybody is interested in it, I'm more than happy to share it. I'm going to give you a different synopsis than just the bullet points here. But the characters that I want you to hear about are Undine, of course, Colborne, her uncle, the adoptive human parents, Bertalda, and the knight Huldbrand. Undine was a lovely and playful water spirit. She's the daughter of an underwater king, and she wishes to be granted the one thing that her kind cannot attain on its own, an immortal soul. According to Motte Fouqué, when a water spirit dies, it simply vanishes. And the only way to gain a soul, and hence immortality, is to love and marry a human. Undine longs to have a soul and to feel both joy and sorrow, and therefore she chooses to leave her father's water palace to be raised on land by an elderly and poor farming couple. Sometime after Undine's 18th birthday, a knight named Huldbrand comes across her remote home, and the two are instantly attracted to each other. Being a water spirit with supernatural powers, Undine, with the help of her uncle Colborne, calls up a great storm that turns her home into an island, forcing the knight to stay until he falls in love with her. A traveling priest's ship becomes caught in the storm, and Undine's water spirit, Uncle Colborne, conveniently brings him to the shore, to the house in time to marry them. Undine and the knight join in marriage, and with that marriage, Undine's quest for a soul becomes reality. Undine deeply loves her husband, but knowing that she has married him under these false pretenses, she takes him out to the water and gives him a choice: be set free from the obligation of marriage, or accept her as she is, as a water spirit. He confesses his undying love for her, and the couple begin their life together. On their journey to the knight's home, Undine's uncle Colborne shows himself to be very untrusting of humans and rather unpleasant to be around. They also have to contend with the struggle of the knight's first love, Bertalda. Innocently, Undine chooses Bertalda as her best friend, and she has Bertalda move into the castle with the couple. Over time, this proves to be a mistake, as the knight and Bertalda begin resenting Undine's differences, and they become spiteful of the kind, gentle water spirit. Despite their hostilities and their growing affection for each other, Undine deeply loves her husband and protects Bertalda from any dangers Colborne brings about for her. One day, on a fateful trip down the Danube, a fight ensues between the knight and Undine, which results in the knight commanding Undine to return over the water to be forever away from him. Undine, devastated at this, agrees, but parts with a warning. In the water world, there is a code of faithfulness that, if unheeded, condemns the guilty party to die at the hand of the faithful lover. For a time, the knight heeds the warning and remains faithful to her. However, Bertalda eventually accompanies him back to the castle, and they choose to marry. On their wedding night, Undine, heartbroken at the task that she has to perform, enters her beloved husband's room and kills him with a weeping kiss. That's the story. As kind of a summation. There's a couple of fun. I didn't spoil the whole thing. There's a couple of fun little twists and turns in the book itself, but that's the story that Reinecke then interprets into music. Now, personally, this is everything I've told you up to this point is a summary of the book and fact. Now we're going to start delving into imagination. I believe that Reinecke's musical version of Fouqué's novella is portrayed from the viewpoint of Undine herself. Therefore, there are some slight modifications in his version of the music. Bertalda is only ever seen as a friend, and she's really barely mentioned in Reinecke's rendition because she's just a part of Undine's joy. Colborne is an uncle who can be an ally in movement 2 with the storm, or a protective annoyance in movement 3. The love theme, which will be her heart song, you can see it in movement 2 as well as in movement 4. So there's several pieces in this that it just seems to me that this is written from her perspective. Now, interpretations vary greatly. In the preface of and I don't have my copy of the Reinecke on me, but at the end of the slideshow, I'll have all of my references up there, and you can see which version of the Reinecke I used, but it was the Weiner Urtext edition. Heinrich Dorn is quoted as saying in the introduction, he's the one that wrote the introduction. Ermline Capel is the one that said this. The first 2 movements are worthy of the name of Undine and the character of the flute, in their parts swelling sweetly, part teasingly, part lingeringly. From this point on, we resign both qualities and the rest of the piece doesn't connect. I totally disagree with that. I believe that all 4 movements are masterfully written for the book. So interpretations vary greatly. The one thing that Capel and I totally agree on is that, and again to quote Capel, Reinecke's flute sonata contains several musical peculiarities which cannot be explained without reference to the Undine story. I believe that's absolutely true. So we have complete freedom to have our own interpretation as long as you can find it in the music. All right, grab your score if you have it. If not, no worries at all. Movement 1. I believe that movement 1 is actually kind of predates the novel. It's Undine's decision to leave her watery world. In the novel, it starts kind of with her coming on the shore, but this would be her moment of, you know, she really wants the soul, but she's not sure she wants the sacrifice. Undine is a lovely and playful water spirit who wishes to be granted an immortal soul. To receive the soul, she must fall in love with and marry a human. Therefore, in this movement, she leaves her father's watery palace to be raised on land. We're going to dive right into the opening. Note that Reinecke chose to rotate Undine's theme around the hollow sound, the E5 on the flute. That's a very hollow sounding note for every flute player who's on this Zoom today. You know that. And some highlights. We could go through this piece measure by measure, but we don't have that kind of time. So I'm literally just going to give you some highlights because I want your own interpretations to be able to come out in the conversation. So enjoy the highlights and then discover on your own. Here is the opening theme. You can hear that hollow, the hollow sound, the 6/8, the rolling of the waters with the big leaps. So many rich moments in this. And then you get the turbulent waters in the piano, where it's this uncomfortable background to the heart-wrenching theme, where she's kind of wailing her soul eventually. But right now, it's like I kind of think of it as deep water bubbles, where she's anxious and just kind of jetting through the water. Now with this, we're going to listen to the same excerpt again, but amid Undine's longing cry, this feel of the music changes just for 2 beats, as if there's a large swell in the water, giving this feel of momentary weightlessness. And then to point out where this is, oh, look at this. Okay. We'd be looking at this section. Oh, okay. You're going to have to just hear it because that's the one part I don't have visually available. But let's listen to that section again.
It's on the next slide.
Oh, it's on the next slide?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. Good. So here we go. So if you look at this right here, it's almost as if it gets weightless for a moment. I think about the times that I've been in a boat or floating on my back in the water, and all of a sudden there's this little swell that just takes me for a moment. And that's one of those moments where you can just see the water that Undine is living in. Now you've got the end of the beginning of the movement, the end of the statement of the theme, and it's this fast, fun, playful run up to the high G. And then it starts to break into the development section. And after we get this playful run up to the high G, you've got this struggle within Undine of choosing a soul or staying in her father's watery kingdom. It just gets muddy and full and rich and kind of almost battling itself every now and again. And finally, she makes up her mind, becomes resolute in her decision to leave the watery world. And I'm kind of putting the whole development section into one paragraph because we don't have time to dig so deeply. But those are just thoughts as you go through this. You can watch Undine wrestle with this big decision, and then she makes up her mind, and you can hear that. I can hear that. That's my interpretation in the music itself. But here's that playful run up to the high G. And then as we keep moving, eventually we get to the end of this movement. And the last two notes to me, as we're getting near the end of this movement, it's almost as if Undine comes to the surface and just kind of starts, she's made up her mind. She's going to leave the watery world. She's going to go onto dry land. And now it's almost as if she's floating on top of the surface as she gets near the end, kind of doing her final preparations before she steps out. And the last two notes, played by both piano and flute together, seem to say, I'm here. In this movement, Reinecke brings the listener into the watery world of Undine. Using rolling with rhythms, rising and falling intervals, he portrays the water. The fast and furious scales seem wild interval leaps that Reinecke incorporates. He portrays splashing in these deep water bubbles. And with careful selection of instrumentation, dynamic markings, and range placement, he adds to the scene sounds that match the deep water images that he wishes to portray. Now, movement 2, the one that we kind of opened with and said, what on earth is this? Here's my interpretation. It's a spinning storm, a jazzy fireplace seduction, and they fall in love. Sometime after Undine's 18th birthday, a knight named Huldbrand comes across her remote home, and the two are instantly attracted to each other. Undine, with the help of her uncle Colborne, calls up a great storm that turns her home into an island, forcing the knight to stay until he falls in love with her. Now, you've heard these before, but let's listen to them again now in context. You've got this spitty, almost playful storm brought about by Colborne and Undine. And then, of course, it repeats. And then you have this jazzy fireplace seduction theme. When the storm, and after this theme, if you look at the score, you'll notice that the storm comes back, but as piano, which to me means they're inside now with your jazzy fireplace scene, and they can just hear the storm through the window. The storm goes through the window again because of course is in a rondo. So you've got your A, B, A, C, A themes. And after the spitty storm through the window, the two fall in love. And this new theme arises out of the store, and this is the love between Undine and the knight. However, since I believe that this interpretation is from the Undine's perspective, this is a theme that will return at the end of the book, at the end of the song, the end of the fourth movement, where it's her mourning and her memories at the end. But here, it's the rich beginnings. What a rich, incredible theme. Reinecke closes this movement with the raging storm again, which he opened the movement, and that completes the rondo form. Using these three themes in this movement, it's kind of like viewing a scene from multiple perspectives. While the storm, so cleverly depicted through the smattering notes and the frantic tonguing from the flute player, is happening outside the cottage, the warm, jazzy, flirty fireplace, the scene takes place inside as a wonderful contrast. And then when the storm returns, it's piano like viewing it through a window, and the beautiful rolling love theme that Reinecke brings to the midst of the storm in the fireplace, a theme that will be revised in the closing of the last movement, kind of tying everything together. Movement 3, Undine and the knight, very much in love. And they're kind of moving into their castle. And probably in this movement, some of her joy would be perhaps Bertalda. I'm not really truly convinced that, well, maybe Reinecke brings her in this moment, but to her, everything would have been joy. To Undine, everything would have been joy. She has her soul. She has a husband that she loves and adores, and that at this point in the story really loves her, and a best friend. And they're moving into the castle. And then you have Kolborn's aggressive interruption that's just downright almost mean. And it's short, but it's absolutely there. And it's just a reminder that the uncle is always watching, which is very true to the book. What a beautiful theme. Now, here comes Kolborn with his brief, angry, untrusting interruptions. And even though it's brief, it is intense. In the book, there's a couple of very dramatic scenes with Kolborn, and after having read it, I can just absolutely visualize the untrusting water spirit attacking in any way he possibly can. The third movement, love song and rude interruption, have these waters that are expressed by these large then small interval leaps and a constant up and down rolling motion, like the line, like the swell and ebb of the water. The only interruptions to the joy are the threats of the Uncle Colborne, shown through those raging, rising, and falling triplets. And then Colborne is unable to cause this intended disruption, and the movement moves back into the original third movement love scene. However, down a whole step, making it particularly soulful in the flute line. The movement ends gently with a pianissimo imperfect, authentic cadence in G major. Movement 4. This is, oh my goodness, one we could go measure by measure. There is so much in this particular movement all by itself. So I'm going to only point out 7 points, but it is jam-packed. Jam-packed. First of all, you've got the angry argument with the furious knight and the pleading Undine. You've got Undine's warning of, if you are unfaithful, I'm going to have to kill you. You've got Undine cast back into the sea, the knight's infidelity. Wait until you hear Undine's climb up the tower stairs. Oh my goodness. You've got the knight's murder. And then you've got Lost in Memories, this watery circle at the end of the book. It talks about how she made a little water circle around his grave. So on a fateful trip down the Danube, an argument ensues between the knight and the Undine, which results in the knight commanding Undine to return to the water and be forever away from him. Undine, devastated, agrees, but parts with a warning. In the water world, there is a code of faithfulness that, if unheeded, condemns the guilty party to die at the hand of the faithful lover. For a time, the knight heeds the warning and remains faithful to her. However, he eventually chooses to remarry Bertalda, and Undine, heartbroken at the task she has to perform, climbs the tower stairs to suffocate her beloved husband with a weeping kiss. You got this fierce argument. And to me, you've got the ba-da-da-da, that's the knight just really getting after her. And then Undine just pleads in response. And this argument goes back and forth for quite a while. Oh, look at that. Yep. And as she pleads, the knight's agitation continues. In the next scene, she seems to be saying, I can actually hear in my head when I play it, oh, please, dear knight, yes, please be faithful. And she just crying this out, please be faithful. Oh, please, dear knight, yes, please be faithful. And then the scene goes, she slips over the side, she disappears in the water. And for just a couple of measures, everything is okay. Sad, but okay. And then he obviously has gotten remarried at this point. And if you watch these triplets that are based over, 2 beats of bum 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 bum, you can actually, it's like she's climbing the tower stairs, which is one of the scenes from the book. And oh my goodness, here she comes. can just hear her coming up, and oh my goodness, brace yourself. And then it goes straight into, oops, there we go. Straight into, she's facing her husband now, and she's smothering him, and it ends in silence as he dies. And in the book, it talks about how he almost welcomed her. He knew the consequences of his actions, and that was his first. He was married to her. He loved her very much, and so this is their face off and the smothering as he succumbs to death. Oh, sorry, trying to get that out of the way. I guess I'll put it back over there. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're trying to kill off a night here. Let's have this not bother you. All right. And this powerful piece ends with her circling his grave with water, spending all eternity with her beloved husband, remembering the love that once shared. And one thought back on that death scene, I got sidetracked with my computer glitch, but one thought on that death scene is that the silence is so profound that there's a fermata over the whole of the silence. He completely dies, and there's a pause, and then enters this water circle and this memory that she's now bringing back up. Oh, we appear to have a commercial. Why do we have a commercial? Let me try this again. I'm not sure why we have a commercial. I'm going to try it one more time. How very sad. Let me go back to that last clip then. Okay, let's see here. Sorry, technical difficulties. Maybe the commercial will skip. Okay, good. Okay. This movement takes the listener through the emotions of a broken relationship, anger and fighting, mourning and loss, And these motions are portrayed through a driving, almost atonal approach. The drastic leaps, the long screaming notes in the flute line, the disconcerting 2/3 sections that add to the emotional dramatization. Karl Reinecke, to me, clearly defines Undine's desires and determinations in the first movement, her playfulness, gentleness, and devotion in the second and third movements, and her anguish in the fourth movement. Because, well, and yet at the end of the piece, he ends it in a major key. Because after all, as Undine explains to Colborne, although I now dwell here beneath the waters, said she, yet I have brought my soul with me, and therefore I may weep, little as you, Colborne, can now know what such tears are. They are blessed, as everything is blessed to one gifted with a true soul. And the memories fade in Karl Reinecke's Undine Sonata. Spending time with an interpretation is kind of like steeping a tea bag. The longer my tea sits, the richer the flavors become in my musical interpretation cup. And I've read lots of other interpretations and I've thought about them. And I've studied the piece from a music theory standpoint. I chatted with teachers and then I listened and played and listened and played and listened and played the sonata over and over again to pull out the story as I heard Reinecke tell it. And there are so many other treasures in this piece that we didn't even get a chance to touch on today. But that's okay, because the years that this process has taken to get myself to this point, what an exciting journey each one of you get to be on as well, as you too work through this interpretation for performing. A few of the resources that I directly showed you today are, you've got the Undine book itself. This is the version that I read. I found it on Amazon, and the introduction essays were interesting to read as well. But the book itself, truly is an 1811 fairy tale. And in the first chapter, I'm just going to tell you right now, she's a little bit of a spoiled water sprite. She kind of has her moments. But as the story goes on, she becomes this beautiful, gentle, kind spirit. This is the version's not the right, the edition of Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. And this has wonderful introductions in this book that really define why Grimm was so important and how that would have had impact in the culture of Reinecke's time. This is the actual version of the Reinecke. The scores that you saw today, the pictures of the scores you saw today, all came from this urtext edition. And the rest of the resources, which you can find, should anybody want a copy of my slideshow, you will have access to this list of resources as well. So now I'd love to open it up. Looks like we have just enough time to do so. I'd love to open it up to some thoughts, some questions if you have any, but also your why. What do you hear in the music? What interpretations or thoughts have you had in the process of this? So we can stop my screen share.
Wow, thank you, Anne, so much for that information. That really, I've studied this piece. I'm sure a lot of us on the call have as well, but I really enjoyed just like the deeper knowledge of everything that you went into, especially like all the Grimm's fairy tale background. Like I hadn't really looked into that before, but I think that's really, really helpful when decoding this piece. So, and you said this was for your master's thesis?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Cool. Does anybody have any questions for Anne, or you can also like unmute yourself and ask?
Audio now unmuted.
I have a question.
Zoom us has new window.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Everyone, will this be on the NFA website?
I read the 1938 play by Jean Giraudoux, and I just was wondering, because I haven't read the novella, how if that would add interpretation to the piece.
That's a fun question. So I actually haven't read that play, but here's what I can tell you. When I was doing my own research, I found great joy in reading every interpretation I could because it really kind of opened my eyes and ears and imagination to whatever was going to come up. So I would encourage that. I would encourage reading the novella as well because then you actually see where the story came from. But any opportunity, it was actually somebody else's interpretation that gave me the idea that the first movement perhaps was prior to the book. So, the opportunity to really branch out our own imagination by utilizing other people's is wonderful. So I'm all for I'm actually, if you would put that in the chat, I would love to look into that play myself. That would be very fun because I might add some richness to my own thought process.
Audio now unmuted.
Okay, great. Thanks. The chat isn't accessible, but if I emailed that to Millie, could she pass it on?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, Kristen.
cool. I will do that directly after this meeting.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Also somebody asked if we can get a copy of the presentation. I think we can link that and if you're comfortable with this, I think if you send it to Noah and we can link it on our virtual event series
Perfect.
page. And this event will also be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. This is our last virtual event series for the spring. And we will probably open up applications for you to submit here in the next couple of months. If you're interested in submitting so that you can present just like Anne did today in the future. So any other questions?
Does anybody have any interpretations that were different than mine that they'd love to kind of be brave a little bit and share?
Hi, this is Ada Jones. I'm not going to undo my video because I look terrible today. Sorry. I think you just went into way more detail than I kind of had ever thought of. Usually it's just sort of the overall picture. But I think the Grimm's, I think Millie was saying that the Grimm's fairy tales connection, I never knew that little hitch about them, about the children and their view of children in the German society at that point. That was really interesting connection. And I have a student playing this on her senior recital in the fall, so I'm definitely going to share this with her. So thanks to the NFA and for you for being willing to let us all kind of use your ideas. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I love that. I was surprised. It was so fun as I was working through my master's process, really looking into what the history meant and stumbling across that little gem about the Grimms as well. Because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, they wrote these horrific stories. And then I realized actually they were meant to be teaching tools. It was steeped in the culture. That was really a fun discovery for me too. So that's makes my heart sing that people are enjoying that because that was one of my big aha moments. And the idea of, the wicked stepmothers, when you realize the culture and where in that time the men would go off to work and the women would stay at home, and if the husband would die, the women had no way to support themselves, so they had to quickly remarry, and then they would usually leave their own kids with their grandparents, with the paternal grandparents, and go off and raise the others. So hence now you have a backdrop for wicked stepmothers and abandoning mothers, and that was such a fun piece of knowledge to go into all of this with. So yay, I'm glad that was enjoyable.
And thanks for choosing that particular recording. I mean, it just makes me want to go back and practice it myself again.
I know, right? He is so amazing.
All right. Thank you for that, Ida. So Jenny said, I would like to comment that I'm completely intrigued and I like the piece so much more. Thank you. Yeah, super fun. Oh yeah, Anne, where are you located?
I actually live in Fairbanks, Alaska. I'm very delighted to say my flute teacher, Dorley McWayne, for those who might know her. But today I'm physically in Michigan because my daughter is getting ready to go off to college. So I'm in a bed and breakfast, but usually I'm in Fairbanks, Alaska.
I'm doing a project. Oh, who said this? Jennifer Shannon, doing a project on Latin American sirens. Undine is mentioned quite a bit in one of my resources. If anyone is interested, it is a book called Music of the Sirens. Oh, Ostern and dysphagia. Amazing. That's
Cool.
really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Um, all right.
Yay. Welcome, Candace.
Oh, awesome. 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 Yeah. All right. So also, Anne, you're attending the convention, right?
Yes, I'll
Yeah.
see you
Okay.
on
So
board.
if you all want to meet Anne in person and myself, please, our convention is coming up here it's gonna fly by the next couple months in Portland, Oregon. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure this piece is gonna be performed. I would assume. But all right. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, thank you again for joining us today. And we will have this recording up on our YouTube channel within the week. And if you want to go back and reference, and thank you so much, Anne, for joining us
Thank you.
today and giving us some wonderful information. And I hope to see you all in Portland or on our next virtual event. So I hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday.